Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webcast on taking your business plastic neutral. I hope you all can hear me, and welcome to this podcast. I'm really looking forward to hear today from Peter from rePurpose about how you can take your business plastic neutral and discuss with all of you about your questions and about all the things you want to know on how to take this practically forward. I'm the CEO of Taival. I will talk a little bit more about what Taival is in a moment. Before we start, a couple of ground rules, some pointers. Please keep your microphone muted at all times. I'm not even sure if you can unmute your microphone. I tried it earlier and I couldn't. So, but please make sure that it's muted so that you don't disturb other participants in listening. Feel free to ask questions throughout the time. We will come back to those in the end in a QA, where we will have roughly 10 to 15 minutes to address any questions you might have. There is a Q&A icon that you can see on your screen. So if you click that and type in your questions, we will be able to see those and pick them up later. Also, if there's any other points or things you want to address, there's a chat function that you can easily use and get in touch with other participants as well as with the speakers. So these are the ground rules. I'm looking forward to get a lot of questions from you. As a first thing, as I understand, we have participants from all over the globe. Could you please take a second and open up the chat and type into the chat where you are from? And we'll take, I guess, 1 or 2 minutes to give you time to type that in to see where everyone is from. In the meantime, I think it's great to see all of you here to basically bring the community together, even in times when we cannot travel and we cannot be together physically. I think it's important to come together to share our ideas, share insights, share fantastic things that are actually working to bring our world closer to circularity, to a sustainable setup, which in these times, for obvious reasons, is something that has been a little bit disappearing from the headlines, but is still one of the important topics of our times that we need to talk about and need to basically keep up in our day-to-day discussions. Looking at the chat, we actually have a very international audience. Great. People from Finland, from Mumbai, from Brussels, from very many different places, Copenhagen. Great. Welcome, everyone. Switzerland. Welcome, everyone. So we see we can even get together and share ideas without traveling, without emitting CO2. Looking forward to get all of your questions, ideas, and have an active discussion. As I mentioned, maybe a couple of quick words about Taival. So Taival is a very young company. We established Taival 3 years ago, basically with the idea to bring together different elements, strategy, technology, design, and circular economy to address some of the burning topics that we see in the world today. I personally have a long background in strategy and technology consulting and projects, so have actually all of the other people within the Taival team. We work in projects around, for example, plastic. So we've been working with Smart and Clean, which is a part of the city of Helsinki, on a plastics ecosystem where we develop the plastics ecosystem and the underlying data model, which is why I'm extremely excited to hear today about the plastic neutrality topic more, because that links very much into that. And we strongly believe that bringing these technologies together, or these different elements together, strategy, technology, design, and circular economy, will be critical to address our transformation as a business, as human beings, as a world, to a more circular, to a more sustainable world. Happy to talk more about Taival, but that's not the purpose of this webinar. So I won't be taking too much more time of that. If you want to hear more, write it into the chat, contact me directly, and I'm happy to basically tell you more about what we're doing and all the cool projects we've been involved in. Without further ado, I'm happy to hand over to Peter, CMO and co-founder of rePurpose, a very cool company, a very cool organization that is working on helping all of us basically in the transition to not a plastic-free world, because we will most likely always see plastics in our world, but to a world where we are plastics neutral, where basically plastics stay in the circularity instead of avoiding plastics altogether. And it's naturally also a very important bridge, technology bridge solution to help us in the current times where we're still consuming a lot of plastics. So looking forward to hear more about that. And then later on, remember, write down your questions and we're happy to come back to those later. Peter, over to you.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's so excited to be here today. My name is Peter Wong-Yamdal. I'm a co-founder and chief marketing officer at rePurpose. As Michael mentioned, we are a global movement of conscious consumers and businesses going plastic neutral. Very much inspired by carbon credits, we are the world's first plastic credit platform where we help people and companies worldwide take effortless and impactful climate action. And we do so by financing and removing and recycling as much ocean-bound plastic as you use in your packaging and operations. As Michael mentioned as well, it's a lot of doom and gloom feelings today. First of all, I just want to say that I hope everyone's staying safe and indoors. Even when we are stuck in our own homes, we're still great to be tuning webinars like this and using online resources. We're alone, but together at the same time. So a little quick agenda for today. So first, going to go through a little bit about what is the concept of plastic neutrality, how does it work for companies and brands, and secondly, a little bit about how plastic neutrality as an instrument can actually mobilize billions of dollars of financing towards scaling up circular economy solutions across every part of the value chain. And then thirdly, COVID-19 is all on our minds, so just some quick tips and tricks on why and how you should still pursue sustainability even under a pandemic. So jumping straight into it, the pain point that we're solving for with plastic neutrality is really there's a gap, a massive gap between what consumers want in terms of product environmental credentials and climate action from businesses and what companies are realistically able to accomplish. See, we all know that plastic is hard to eliminate. It's ubiquitous, used in every supply chain. It doesn't happen just with a snap of a finger like that. And by the same time, consumers, millions of which are demanding for change and demanding for companies to take action today. So how can we bridge that gap? And having engaged with companies and businesses over 6-7 different different countries in the past 2.5 years, we've distilled down the challenges around packaging really to 3 different challenges. One, many forms of plastic is not recyclable or never recycled in practice. Your styrofoam, your multi-laminate packaging, your chips wrappers and chocolate wrappers, the resin grade 3s through 7s, which doesn't have an end recycling value, and that's what actually represents of the majority of what actually contaminates oceans and waterways and landfills. Secondly, despite that, plastic is still amazingly magical material. It's got durability, got performance, and it's got essential product safety for a lot of companies, especially within food and beverage, that relies and needs plastic from a regulatory perspective. And third, the unfortunate truth is that a lot of forms of alternatives to plastic is, such as aluminum, glass, paper, and bioplastic is actually either worse for the environment or sometimes logistically infeasible. A couple government commissioned LCAs, the British government found that non-plastic food packaging alternatives actually uses more than 3 times of energy and at least increases carbon footprints of a life cycle by more than 3%. And one Danish government commissioned LCA found that you have to use a paper grocery bag more than 40 times for it to be environmentally better than using a plastic grocery bag once and have it end up in the landfill. So the unfortunate truth is that plastic is going to stay and be here, but how can we design a solution for companies to act today, demonstrate that environmental responsibility to customers and stakeholders overnight, and set up a kind of a framework for creating change going forward? And that where we bridge the pieces of the puzzle together and launch the world's first plastic credit platform. And we help companies take their supply chains and products plastic neutral by wiping out as much plastic waste from the environment as they use in their operations. And the way it works is honestly very simple. For every 50 cents, US cents contributed to our platform, we essentially guarantee to remove and recycle 1 additional kilogram of plastic waste otherwise landfilled, burned, or flushed into the oceans. And we've worked with companies in a variety of different sectors, particularly within food and beverage, personal care, health, beauty, wellness, and fashion, all these sectors and industries of all sizes, small to large companies who uses plastic, and obviously a lot of plastic in disposable products as well. So this is our primary work and our partnership that we engage with brands on taking and certifying their products as plastic neutral. And we essentially do so in 3 steps. So first, we help you measure your plastic footprint. For most companies, packaging volumes is a pretty simple multiplication equation between how many grams of plastic in each unit of packaging times by the amount of sales they did last year. So I just take one of our biggest partnerships and companies to date, Just Water, which is a paper-based beverage brand founded by Jaden Smith and Will Smith in the US. And they came to us and they we found that they use 200 tons of plastic, hypothetically. And that's where the compensation comes in, where for every 50 cents, so the company pays us $100,000 over the course of the year, where that money goes into intercepting and recycling at least 200 tons of plastic waste from the environment on the brand's behalf. And declaring their products as plastic neutral, and then helping them communicate and talk about it in an innovative way. And then thirdly, we understand that plastic neutrality is not just offset, and it should not just be offset. It's a framework for creating change going forward. So we also work with companies. A lot of the medium-sized or small brands that we work with don't have massive resources like the way that Unilever or Coca-Cola might have to invest in sustainability. So we really sit alongside of them and help them think through how to reduce the amount of virgin plastic and set and meet tangible commitments around the reduction of virgin plastic in their supply chains. So we also got a couple other ways of engaging with plastic neutrality. It doesn't require the certification. So for example, a great tool is for your e-commerce platforms, where we actually help companies who have e-commerce and kind of direct-to-consumer platforms add a checkbox at the point of sale, point of checkout, where you can enable your customers to kind of opt in and offset the unique plastic footprint of their purchases for no more than $1 or euro or even a rupee sometimes. And these are, at no cost to the business, and where a business can, very much easily invite their customers to join them on their sustainability journey and go plastic neutral on their purchases on a daily basis. We also work with individuals, but in the context of this kind of conversation, a lot of the businesses that we worked with have enjoyed basically using this as a way to invite, again, have their customers join their journey and go plastic neutral with rePurpose, and by calculating their footprint, understanding the contribution to the problem, and then compensating and subscribing for about the price of a coffee a month. A little bit, I'm sure, we're spoken a lot about how it works. Now, I'm sure you're all curious about how does it actually, when you say 50 cents equals to 1 kg, what does that actually mean? So a little backstory about rePurpose here. I mean, this venture started about 2.5 years ago, and we started out of, visited one of Asia's largest landfills in Deonar East in Mumbai. And there was a moment when we were standing between mountains of plastic on the one side, and on the other side, the endless booming skyline of India's financial capital, and realized that something had to change. And that's where the theory of change of our impact really comes from, in that at the end of the day, in the past, we also have worked with, engaged with, hundreds of companies, our innovations. These are recycling social enterprises or circular economy startups across every part of the value chain of reduce, reuse, recycling, and redesign. But a lot of these companies are simply underfunded. And because of that, they don't have the ability to scale up their impact. And when more money has gone into WeWork as a company than every recycling startup in the world in history combined, no wonder why we are left clueless about solving a problem as big as plastic pollution. So that really is what informs our theory of change, which is that rePurpose is a platform, and we really are here to train and empower local entrepreneurs within the recycling and plastic economy to help them scale up their impact. So we work with vetted projects with our global impact network of organizations across India, in 5-6 different cities in India, in Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Kenya, Colombia, Haiti, and Honduras as well. And the way it works, what is that? How do you define that 1 kg of plastic removed from the environment? Here is where we really co-design and implement these supply chain interventions within the local recycling, within the recycling supply chain of the organization that we're working with. And the money, the contributions around plastic offsets is going into interventions on the ground that remove and recycle more plastic waste from the environment than in the status quo. That's a very crucial principle where we're, for example, subsidizing the cost of recovering low-value plastic waste materials that would have otherwise never been reclaimed from the environment if it wasn't for a contribution from an offset brand. Also with a lot of the companies, larger companies we work with, we also actually build and actually literally sponsor new infrastructure within conveyor belts and baling machines and trucks and real estate in areas with no recycling infrastructure, like in rural areas of India or in island nations in Asia Pacific. So various ways of doing that creditizing process. Also goes without saying that I think not the plastic neutrality is not just impactful from an environmental standpoint; it's also deeply impactful from a human standpoint. With there are millions of informal workers who are engaged with informal recycling all across the developing world, and I think these these workers are really the front line of. If you look at today, waste management and recycling is an essential service under a pandemic, and these men and women are on the front line of helping and carrying our society over in this pandemic, but also at the same time on the front lines of climate change. And from an impact verification standpoint, which I'm sure it's very important for us, is to verify and guarantee that your contributions as a brand or as a business or as an individual to go plastic neutral actually creates verified impact. So we have tools ranging from external auditors to a blockchain-enabled kind of dashboard to track and authenticate information, as well as on-the-ground third-party staff that is on rePurpose's payroll to basically due diligence and conduct data gathering from the supply chains of our partners, which all these metrics are communicated in a form of a dashboard to brands that we work with, where you can approve and reject documentation alongside of this entire life cycle, and also understand and just keep in touch with where the impact is actually headed. We also, at the same time, I think for so long, the philosophy of corporate social and environmental responsibility has been very detached from the marketing function, which we think is a big problem and a big innovation. And we think that, and we are very kind of obsessed with achieving that marketing ROI in addition to creating environmental and social impact on the world. So we got an amazing in-house creative marketing team to talk about this and help brands, every brand to work with, to tell unique stories and really leverage plastic neutrality to reach new eco-conscious segments and to retain and build loyalty and brand with existing customers as well. And so just shifting gears a little bit and on towards COVID, I think at the end of the day, we, in spirit of carrying and fighting the epidemic and the pandemic, we should, one existential threat for humanity, we shouldn't let another existential threat completely go unnoticed, and that is obviously the climate crisis. And it's just a couple of resources. And we also have actually put together a 6-page guide for this and why and how sustainability and brand professionals can still pursue sustainability under a pandemic, and happy to forward that in an email follow-up to you guys, the participants in the webinar. But just a couple of quick tips for now. Number one, with the business slowdown, you might have more time on your hands, particularly, imbalance in your teams. It could be interesting to have some of the strategic people think through sustainability, use this time to strategize around it, because it's not an easy thing to get into. So there's a lot of online resources. There are webinars like this. There's the Ellen MacArthur Foundation Circular Economy Learning Hub, and there's newsletters like ours, the Circular Post, as well as many others, which we'll give in the follow-up guide, where you can learn and just get to know what that means. Plans, I'm sure you've always had the motivation and have always put it on the back burner, perhaps. And secondly, I think it's a tremendous opportunity as well that consumers are spending time online and shopping online. And this is an amazing opportunity to take the hints and really green your e-commerce journey and experience with solutions that actually make sense and engage with users and kind of tell stories on email and social and a variety of channels. What we had mentioned before around the checkbox integration could be an amazing tool as well, where you can opt in and add a checkbox and add your enable your customers to offset and opt in at no cost to the business. So that's one example out of many where potential ways for you to basically green your e-commerce journey. And then thirdly, I think the rebound is inevitable and is going to come. It's an amazing time for you to kind of take stock and set yourself apart and build for the rebound. And consumers are going to emerge out of this crisis with a renewed interest around protecting against the existential risks of our humanity, pandemics being one, and climate change being another. And they're going to be looking for that kind of renewed leadership from companies in that fight around social responsibility and particularly protecting the environment. So just going to end with, I know we have got participants all over the world, but just want to talk a little bit about the partnership between rePurpose and Taival and what it possibly can mean for companies in Finland and in EU and in Europe in general. So we got a long-term partnership where Taival is an advisory company that can really help companies think through, learn, and strategize around circular economy, and rePurpose is there to take the next step and help companies take immediate and concrete action around particularly plastic neutrality. Also goes without saying that I think customers are asking for change and that people are looking for companies to take leadership. Also just a quick advice and tip on checking up on the new European Union Circular Economy Action Plan, which just got published, I think, about a couple of weeks ago. So there's a lot of new regulations and new guidelines. So it'd be very important, I think, for companies and even for sustainability professionals in the space to understand the regulations around it, particularly around recycled content and the restrictions on single-use plastic, which is quite detailed. So I think I'll end there and just say that, happy to contact us. We're at plasticneutral.global. Feel free to contact us for any help and thinking overall on a larger level around your sustainability strategy, but also particularly if you're interested in taking parts of your product or your shopping experience online plastic neutral. So I'll end it there. I think there's a couple Q&A questions that are already coming to the picture. So Michael, I'm not sure if you want to take a look and see if there's anything that might be relevant for our discussion. Michael, I think you're on mute. Let me, give me 1 second.
Okay, now you should be able to hear me. Sorry about that. Great, thanks a lot, Peter. I think it's really fantastic to hear. And as said, I mean, you pointed it out and we briefly spoke about it in the beginning. Plastic is here to stay. So I think it's an illusion that plastic will just all of a sudden go away and we will live in a world without plastic. It's just a too important material. It's just a too important part of our everyday living. I think what we can do is we can reduce plastic. But at the end of the day, plastic itself is not evil. Plastic itself is not bad. It's bad that it ends up in nature. It's bad that we produce much more plastic than we can actually use. It's bad that we don't circulate plastic. And I think that is where the solution you have introduced actually provides a fantastic addition to many other tools and solutions that we will hopefully start using and start implementing as we go forward. And I like what you said about COVID, because at the moment, I think COVID is in the headlines, COVID-19, the Corona crisis. It's on everyone's mind and for a very good reason. So I hope we're all at home, we're all healthy, we're all safe, and it will stay that way. At the same time, there will be a time after the crisis, and now is the time to get ready. Now is the time to be prepared and know where you are and know where you want to go as a company. Maybe I'll use the privilege of basically being the one talking to ask you a question, Peter, about rePurpose. I mean, from your point of view, the vision you have, naturally looking at the current situation, but looking far beyond that, what's your vision where you want to take rePurpose, where you want to take the solution that you're offering to companies everywhere, before we go
That's
to
a great question. I think that there's, my response to this might touch up on some of the questions that have been answered so far. I think, for us, I think we recognize that plastic neutrality is a first step, right? I think, it's for a lot of companies that haven't yet taken a lot of action around circular economy, it's really set up a framework for change where, by becoming plastic neutral, you also set a, essentially, if you think about it, an internal kind of tax on the plastic that you're using in a small way, where it basically, where if you take actions around reduction, around reducing the amount of single-use plastic, reducing the amount of virgin plastic, actually reduces the offset cost. So that's a way to incentivize. But I think from a perspective of what we want to take rePurpose, I mean, it's really to enable that action overall, and enable, take and work with companies alongside of their journeys, and work with them as they become more and more serious and invest in sustainability. I think it's important at this stage to really kind of work with companies where they are at, where the challenges are associated, and show them the pathway, and show them that the pathway can not only be impactful from an environmental standpoint, but also very importantly be profitable from the business perspective. Yeah, I think there's a couple. Maybe we can just go down the list of questions, Michael. I think there's
yes.
On top.
So the first question was basically, I mean, do you collect the plastic yourself? Do you recycle the plastic yourself? And what happens with the recycled feedstock? I think you touched a little bit on that during your presentation, but maybe you can expand a little bit on that.
No, definitely. And yeah, so we do, the plastic that we do offset is going towards end destinations that are, the recyclable ones are going to recycling. The ones that aren't recyclable are going towards co-processing. As we all know, right, different kinds of plastic, it's, we all inherently want that tap to stop. But at the same time, we also need that kind of infrastructure all across the developing world, as well as the developed world, to invest into infrastructure that can actually handle plastic waste. And plastic neutrality is a crucial way to scale up that infrastructure, and very different in the sense that maybe you can say carbon neutrality, which is an equivalency from a carbon standpoint, where maybe a McKinsey who is going carbon neutral is offsetting the source of emissions, which is employee travel, with cook stove distribution, which is not necessarily in line in the same supply chain. If you look at what the circular economy needs, we need money. We need to fill this $50 billion per year financing gap that is needed to manage that plastic waste. And from a conceptual level, really plastic neutrality is meant to do that. For companies that pollute and that waste and use plastic, to be able to support the scale up of a global issue that is the bank of plastic pollution exists today. But yes, so the quick answer to that question is that yes, we do, and it depends on it might be, for example, if we're investing into new infrastructure, potentially with bigger companies around plastic neutrality, that infrastructure is picking up a variety of all kinds of waste, right? So not just plastic, also metal, also paper, also wet waste. But within the plastic, it's going to go towards recycling for PET and HDPE and some forms of LDPE, and then other plastic materials are going to go towards co-processing, which is the next best solution for those that are unrecyclable.
Cool. And I think just to add to that, as I mentioned earlier, we did the data ecosystem, the plastics data ecosystem, where we looked at the data flows. And what was very apparent is that naturally, I mean, we all focus on recycling. We all focus on getting the plastic into the recycling system. But at the same time, it's critical to actually have the right capacity so that it doesn't end up in the burning plant, but that it's really reused. So I think what you're pointing out is critical, that we build up the infrastructure at the same time. And I think that was one of the key findings of the project we did there, when we understood the data flows across the ecosystem, that it's important to build the infrastructure to make sure we have the infrastructure specifically in the right places, where the waste is actually being picked up and where it actually needs to be processed. So very, very good point there. Another question we got is, have you seen any changes in the dynamic, in the understanding how businesses basically perceive the plastic issues, and has it become more pressing, more present in the mind and in the strategy and in the discussion?
Yeah, for sure. I think we're all on a learning curve. I think that's what we have realized in the past working this. The understanding around plastic waste management and plastic and circular economy is a new space, right? So I think has been a lot of failures and tries and errors, but I do think that I think and companies are really on a larger level moving away from marketing and moving away from kind of what is it from a communication standpoint to really think about investing in sustainability. So that's becoming more serious in that sense. And I think obviously that stems from the massive consumer interest around plastic waste. When there are some statistics that says that, I think plastic waste is actually one of those environmental issues that is the least polarizing, that, people actually, a lot of consumers who don't necessarily see the connection between climate and ocean plastic actually are looking at the plastic as almost kind of a gateway drug towards environmental kind of activism. It's a visual issue in that sense. But yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, I personally believe that things started to really shift in the beginning of last year around Christmas, when we started to talk about the plastic straws and how plastic is basically ending up in oceans. And I think it made it very, very tangible for people. People really started understanding that they're part of the problem, because before that, I think we talk about these issues very often in a very abstract way, so that people cannot relate to them. And I think that is maybe one of the key learnings we had, and it would be interesting to hear your view on that. I think it's really important to bring these issues to the people, to both business leadership, business people, as well as individuals, to make it understandable, make it simple enough so that they can relate to the problem and they can understand that they're part of the problem, but that they can also be part of the solution, that it basically takes everyone in society to basically contribute. I mean, you were talking about that you work with companies, but also with individuals. I think that is the most critical point here.
For sure.
And another question is on hard to recycle or non-recyclable plastics. I mean, is there any other solution for those other than incineration or landfills? Can we do anything else than burning it or burying it somewhere in the ground?
Yes, that's a great question. I think from Julie, and I'm also going to answer Mr. Vijay's question at the same time around tie-ups with actual recyclers. With a non-recyclable plastic waste, there's the worst solution is obviously non-controlled kind of disposal, which is landfill or flushing into the environment. And the next best is waste to energy. And the best solution is co-processing for the non-recyclable plastic. And that's exactly what we handle, where this waste is sent to cement kilns and cement manufacturing plants, which just remind the audience, I mean, cement manufacturing as a global industry accounts for over 8% of our global CO2 emissions. And a lot of that stems from the energy it burns and energy uses from coal. So this plastic waste is actually basically incinerated within a closed chamber and with zero residue, very differently than waste to energy, which is using the burning of the plastic to produce heat. Here is using and kind of using to produce energy for cement manufacturing, which is the double win of plastic non-recyclable waste not ending up in the landfill, but at the same time of kicking out coal. And that is the best solution currently. And obviously, a lot of innovators are working on those innovative applications around chemical recycling and other things, possibly oil, for example. So I think there's definitely a lot of potential. And we also rePurpose are looking to fund not just organizations that does recycling, but also using the plastic credit financing to fund organizations and startups within reduce and reuse and redesign around their quantified environmental impact. And the other question I think from Mr. Vijay was regarding how do we have tie-ups with actual recyclers? Yes, so I mean that's the model that we work at rePurpose, is where we work with local recycling organizations and social enterprises. So like the Saha Zero Waste of Bangalore, of Waste Ventures India and Hyderabad, and many other places in the world, where these organizations are in need of financing. And from a control and verification perspective, that is exactly where rePurpose adds value. We very much are inspired by the carbon credit system, where a Tesla is not directly selling credits to a McKinsey because Tesla has the maybe the motivation, you can say, to exaggerate their environmental impact. and is a crucial need for a third party to be able to step in, offer the service to businesses and individuals, but also at the same time, verified impact has been created on the ground. So we actually, there's a lot of carbon standards in, like RED++ or VCS or Gold Standard. So we actually work in Vera, which is the organization behind the voluntary carbon standard, and we are advising them as part of the Global Technical Advisory Committee to help them create the world's first plastic credit standard, for which we're going to abide by. So beyond all these internal verifications, we're also using that as a immediate comfort level kind of booster for companies who want to work with us around external audit and verification.
And I think what's very interesting, I think in your process, the first step is to understand how much plastic you're actually producing. And how much plastic your company, your business, I mean, many of the service companies that have an office don't even realize how much plastics they're actually producing and how much impact they're having. So I think that's very interesting. One question was specifically on the tourism industry, and basically the impact that has both in the internal operations and across the supply chain. Do you have any examples, any suggestions on how your platform could be used in that business, in the business of tour operators, in the travel, in the tourism industry?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think we also, our primary application for plastic neutrality has been for brands and companies. We also actually work with employee-centric companies like professional services organizations to take their employee footprint and office stacks and kind of, miscellaneous footprints and, take those companies plastic neutral. So there's definitely a lot of applications across various industries. Within tourism particularly, I do believe though, so I think reduction is a key component, right? I think there is a lot of unnecessary wastage that I think companies before try to, as much as possible, reduce as much as possible, which might think it'd be a different process for brands where plastic neutrality can be the first thing and they can offset and then work towards it because we understand it's a long-term process. Well, the same can be said for tourism as well, but at the same time, I do think that the impact is so, a lot of the plastic packaging is so unnecessary in a way that can be reduced at the same time. But that doesn't mean that there aren't innovative ways of embedding plastic neutrality in this idea of this verified impact in the tourism and the kind of the user journey of customers and travelers booking things and interacting with platforms and to integrating this option and to kind of go plastic neutral on their trips. So for example, you can take a tourism, we haven't worked with any tourism companies yet, but you can imagine a tour company that has a eco-conscious kind of adventure, maybe cruise in Alaska, and they use a certain amount of plastic. They reduce as much as possible. Definitely still are necessary things that are still need to be used as part of that experience. And a consumer can actually opt in and maybe give anywhere between $1 to $10 at a time to maybe offset that footprint at a voluntary basis. Or obviously the business can also leverage that and pay for that certification to go plastic neutral. But I do think that with that said, reduction is important.
Thanks. And maybe related to that, I mean, about industries, about companies. I mean, one question from Dominic was, currently you're working a lot with smaller businesses, smaller companies. I think the question is twofold. I mean, how is your concept ready for the big companies? Can it be scaled for companies like Nestle, like BASF, like other big companies? And then also, how would we get those companies in? I mean, what's your thinking there? How do we get them into this concept, into this thinking?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think that I think from a big brand perspective, it's extremely important to get big companies engaged, and we're so excited to see large commitments. Unilever has committed to going plastic neutral by 2025, and Coca-Cola has committed to collect one plastic bottle bag for everyone they sell by 2030. So I think there's a lot of momentum around big companies who already have public commitments around plastic neutrality, but also at the same time working on pilots. So we are working on a couple of pilots with companies like Estée Lauder and Colgate and a couple of other companies like that. But I think with big companies, where our scalability strategy currently, we on the impact side, we're working with a lot of smaller organizations that are very ethical, kind of very driven by innovation, very the focus around waste worker, waste picker empowerment. But at the same time, think about plastic crediting. Our plan going forward of catering and working with big companies is to work with larger recyclers and infrastructure services companies and waste management services companies like Veolia and the Suez's of the world that recycles and has large infrastructure, and work on projects with them and design offset projects with them, so that we can really offer this kind of ability to scale up the plastic neutrality impact for bigger brands beyond just smaller kind of social enterprise players. But with that said, is a lot of scalability even involved with our current system. We have capacity for about 10,000 tons of plastic offset per year, and that is enough for a lot of the big brands that we're worked with, at least to take one brand and one country from a pilot perspective. But I think that is our scale strategy, is to go and to work with much larger infrastructure players and structure these offset projects. Similarly to what you see in carbon, which is a variety of projects. You got grassroots projects in cook stove distribution in Africa, but you also got larger projects with Teslas and the energy producers of the world around carbon credits. So.
Cool. Thank you. There was one question, and I think more a clarification question. I mean, you naturally collect plastics to offset the plastics that the companies are using. And the question is, how much are you working also with companies to reduce their plastic footprint altogether? So how much does that go hand in hand, or are you focused primarily on offsetting the plastics and then leave the companies to their own devices?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and happy to jump into more detail as well. But there's really a couple of ways that we do that with companies. And number one, as I mentioned, is an incentive for them to reduce their plastic footprints. And I think we often forget the power of economic incentives around this topic, right? If they are going plastic neutral, have this public commitment, they can reduce their plastic neutral fees by reducing the footprint and reducing the amount of offset they're paying. That's number one. Number two, we've got a global network of innovators in the circular economy. We are very much on the forefront of that pulse because we work with them for offset projects. So these are bioplastic providers. These are reuse models, reusable cup models. These can be seaweed plastic. These can be recycling technologies. So we have a global network basically of circular economy innovations that are ready to be linked up with brand clients and bigger companies and who want to make that change. But we're also actually increasingly offering ethically recycled plastic as well as a next step, even within the rePurpose umbrella, where we're actually offering honest plastic, where a lot of recycled plastic today has very murky origins. Similar to what the apparel supply chain went through in the early 2010s, with layers of child labor down this, upstream the supply chain with the first mile. And the similar thing happens here with a lot of waste that recycled plastic produced and maybe marketed for large companies. They have no clue around where the supply chains, where the plastic actually came from. And which can be tainted with unethical wages, with child labor, with health conditions and labor exploitation. So here we're actually working with companies now that we have onboarded for plastic neutrality, who want to take that next step, and where the same organizations that we work with on the ground around offset projects, the plastic they do recycle out of that is going to be reused and connected back to the brands that want to work with a certain partner through us around this honest plastic and incorporating more recycled content in their packaging. So yeah, that's a couple concrete ways we do that, but it's really on a case-by-case basis because you're surprised by how unique every business situation is and where their focus and priorities are. So I think it's very important. There's no one answer to the question. It's really very much an individual kind of partnership that we work on.
And maybe related to that, there's a question: how does plastic neutrality help businesses that already have a sustainable strategy in place to meet their goals in the future? And I think we spoke about the fact that there's naturally kind of a bridging effect for companies to use plastic neutrality as a way, or in combination, exactly as you pointed out, with other means of reducing plastics and working towards a world where less plastic waste is produced. What's your experience there?
Yeah, I think we've worked with a lot of companies that have even changed their sustainability strategies to accommodate for plastic neutrality. I think that's wonderful as well. But yeah, I mean, I think it depends on your goals. And I think, a lot of companies have recyclable goals. A lot of companies, especially bigger companies, have kind of, less intensive goals that are not as impactful as plastic neutrality, such as designing for recyclability, which I think should be the first step in any company's kind of thinking around sustainability strategy, and to keep that long-term as well as the short-term impact. So I think what we're saying here is that a lot of companies' sustainability strategies are for the long term, right? Thinking about, what can we do next 5 years, which is wonderful. We are encouraging that as much as possible because that's extremely important. But where, how can we work on a framework where all of these changes around the sustainability strategy can fit in the umbrella of your plastic footprinting and plastic neutrality? Because neutrality is not just about the offset, it's about the measurement as well, right? How much do you produce and how much can you reduce? So I think, and also at the same time, I think from a communications and marketing standpoint, it's collecting one pouch for everyone you sell can be a great way to appease your customers' concerns in the immediate, and then working towards those shifts in the forward. So I think it's very compatible in that sense.
Okay, cool. Let's maybe have two more questions and then we wrap it up. One question that came in several times and through different angles is like, is there currently a market for plastic credits? And related to that, I mean, how do you calculate plastic credits? Because there's so many different types of plastics, from hard plastic, soft plastic, whatever. What's your thinking on that? And do you know of any plastics credits market or trading platform there?
Yeah, for sure. I think there's 4 or 5 questions that I'm seeing that are relevant to this around, can rePurpose support recycling in a high cost country, pyrolysis, bioplastic, and plastic crediting. It's basically around the pricing and how much can it cost for businesses, and what does that look like for, how do you match up the, the business willingness and and then also match up with the around how much it costs to make the impact. So yeah, so exactly as as you guys pointed out, I mean, it's really, there's a lot of kinds of plastic out there for sure. But at the same time, the plastic crediting isn't necessarily tied to the material type. It's more tied to the intervention needed within a certain geography to recycle and remove more plastic than is status quo, right? So for example, it's not, PET, for example, you can say that PET is highly recyclable, right? It's highly recycled as well. But at the same time, PET still has a lot of issues, right? So you can say maybe you don't need as much of a subsidy for PET, and you can argue that for sure. But then within geography, for example, in Kenya, where the Kenya Milk, the national milk company, produces white PET bottles, and white PET bottles is actually unrecyclable, and that's because it cannot be mixed with the transparent PET bottle. So in the market, in a very unique, idiosyncratic market situation like that, it's not about the plastic type. It's about what is needed in the supply chain to go from A to B, right? To go from baseline towards more impact and more towards getting more in this geography, in this city, in this region of the world. Can we go from where we are and to where we want to be, right? And what is the cost needed to get to that? So that might be subsidizing existing supply chains for recovering low value plastic waste and paying waste workers and ethical wages to recover that plastic that they would otherwise had not picked and otherwise had not dealt with. And for example, one project working with Hyderabad in India is around there's a lot of waste worker and waste picker colonies and settlements in informal colonies where they collect the plastic waste informally from residential societies, from commercial complexes, and they take all of the waste, sure, but they only handle the high value plastic waste or the high value metal waste, right? And then sell it to the recycling markets. But then the other stuff gets dumped. It's either flushed if it's near an ocean or river, it gets burned, or simply landfilled on the side of the colony of the informal settlements, and that has massive health impacts, right? So in that geography, in that example, what you have to do is to raise the price and to create a price for that, so you can create a market for it and be able to pay these waste pickers and waste workers around low value plastic waste to get that removed from the environment because they would have otherwise not dealt with, right? So I think these are just 2 very small examples around. So really kind of what we're saying here is that it has to be customized and there's no kind of one intervention or one price that it takes all because it depends on geography. And then there was a couple of questions around high cost, low cost countries. Yeah, I think definitely, the cost of offset is tied to the labor costs, right, of average labor costs of any country. If you look at a carbon credit project in New York, upstate New York, versus let's say in coastal distribution in rural Uganda, there's obviously different dimensions to that. So I think definitely there is. But at the same time, I can also argue for other kind of ways of creating credits, like around commercial recycling and larger entities in the US, which can amortize that over time. So that's how we pitch to big companies and work with big companies, is where, yes, the 50 cents per kilogram is maybe too high for a Unilever that will pay probably $10 million, $50 million per year to meet their public commitment. But can we find other ways of investing into more infrastructure and more money upfront, and to having that infrastructure that's being created in an area with no infrastructure to create impact on an evergreen basis going forward, and amortizing that cost over time, right? So yeah, so I think that's the questions to that. And then there's question around the actual markets around plastic credits. There is no trading place at the moment, and that's because we're very early and innovative. Obviously, it's great to see we're a couple players in the plastic neutrality space, and I think currently it's not big enough in that sense to create a marketplace. And we do, and that for two reasons. One is maybe it's not big enough, and secondly, we prefer the hands-on approach. We prefer the approach of working with each individual organization and partner, and especially in a place like with plastic neutrality, we want to be able to make sure that this is going to make sense and this impact is going to be foolproof. And that is not necessarily going to be accomplished through a marketplace that trades and buys credits, but one that requires intervention and requires support into the local entrepreneurs around introducing this idea, giving them climate finance, but not just like, here's the money, that's it. But here's the money, here's what we can do with it, and let's measure the impact out of it when we're done with deploying the money on the ground.
Perfect. Thanks, Peter. Maybe one last question. I mean, what's the feedback from the companies you've been working with? I mean, what are the success stories? What have they been able to achieve with your help?
Yeah, I think there was another question around a customer that's failed. Haven't had any, fortunately, we haven't had any customer that has failed in that sense, I think. But from a feedback perspective, I think really a lot of companies actually come to us after being frustrated for so long, right? Their customers have complained about plastic packaging. They're nature-driven, organic, eco-conscious. They have that brand, value and image, and it's being tainted by the plastic they do use. And a lot of companies have been very frustrated and stumbled upon the rePurpose proposition and be like, this is a solution that I needed maybe yesterday. And I think that's been a great feedback in that sense, is that it's like the house is on fire and this is kind of a fire hose, right? And customers are demanding it. There's no solution, or the solutions are poor, expensive, infeasible, or takes 3 to 5 years to implement. Can we use this as a framework to work on it and demonstrate that responsibility, and then also work on it going forward? So I think that's been mainly the feedback, is that it's been a great way to kind of hassle-free way of starting and thinking around sustainability as a starting point. Yeah, so that's been the main feedback.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Peter. We have to wrap it up here. Thanks a lot. Thanks everyone for the questions. Maybe a couple of things. There is a LinkedIn group we have, which is called Digitally Circular. So if you want to continue the discussion, that's the place to be. That's where we talk about digital solutions like the one rePurpose is offering in the circular economy space. So join us there. We have another webinar coming up in our series on the 22nd of April. We will have Jarkko Havas from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation to talk about their Circulytics framework, which will basically help companies to calculate, measure, and basically understand their circular economy impact. So if that's something you're interested in, there will be more information on our LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter feed. So please follow us there, as well as a lot of other information around the topic of circular economy. If you have more questions, if you want to discuss the topic further, please feel free to reach out to Peter or myself. I guess you can find us on LinkedIn and through other channels. And specifically, if you're interested in going plastic neutral, I believe rePurpose is a great solution for you to evaluate there, to bridge, but also to help you have an impact around plastic. So as we said, I think plastics is something that's here to stay. We will not get rid of plastics anytime soon, if ever. So we need to basically be handling plastics responsibly, and we need to basically understand, and we need to make sure we understand what's happening to our plastics. And more than anything else, we need to keep it out of our nature. We need to keep it out of our rivers, out of our oceans, out of our nature. And that's where rePurpose naturally provides a fantastic solution to actually have exactly that impact. Thanks a lot, everyone, for joining. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay strong in these unprecedented, uncertain times. And looking forward to be in touch with one or the other of you, either through our webinars or through any other channels.
Thanks you so much.
Have a great day.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.